There are people who believe that they have a God-given right to rule over others. They believe that their outward appearance is superior to all others. They harbor selfish ambitions to be rich and to have power over what they describe as common people. They lie, cheat, steal, strangle, stab and slash their way to power. They believe that their actual willpower, what the British occultist Aleister Crowley described as the will of Thelema, the royal will, must be obeyed. Literally millions of people have been slaughtered at the behest of the royal lust for war, and thousands of people have been assassinated so that demonic dukes and killer queens can reign supreme. This cabal of crowned killers use the global network of secret societies, loosely described as the Illuminati, to do their bidding and killing. The conspiratorial view of history is the correct view of history. Conspiracy to grab property, conspiracy to make illegal profits, and conspiracy to assassinate has been the driving force behind the royal political elite for thousands of years. Many people believe that conspiracy in world politics simply does not exist. But it is a provable fact that the royal political elite have committed murder to gain power over and over again throughout the ages. Many of these murders were the result of a conspiracy usually orchestrated by politicians and aristocrats serving members of royal families. The Roman Emperor Julius Caesar was stabbed to death on the Ides of March. This was a conspiracy. US President Abraham Lincoln was shot at point-blank range by a distant relative of the British Prime Minister's wife, William Booth. This was a conspiracy. Every November the 5th, the Gunpowder Plot is celebrated. Guy Fawkes planned to explode a bomb beneath the Houses of Parliament. This was a conspiracy. In recent times, we have seen the last truly popular president of the United States, Mr. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, assassinated. This was a conspiracy. According to Muhammad al-Fayed, Princess Diana was the latest victim of a royal conspiracy in which she was allegedly murdered under orders from the British royal family. History teaches us that the royal elite have killed before, and it is most likely that they will kill again. Many people believe that capital punishment, usually in the form of hanging, is no longer permitted in Britain. This is not so. The royal family still reserve the right to prosecute and then hang someone if found guilty of treason. Treason, in its most harmless form, is simply criticism of the royal family. A more serious form of treason would be to conspire, just as Guy Fawkes did, to attack the very heart of the royal political establishment. And another serious form of treason would be to accuse the royal family of murder and thus turn public opinion against the monarchy, possibly resulting in the dethronement of the royals. This film does commit treason, but it is the truth. History tells us that the German impostors who occupy the British throne have consistently tortured, illegally imprisoned, and even murdered, sometimes with their own hands, people who have criticized the monarchy throughout history. This film, for the first time ever, exposes the murderous and, in some cases, downright satanic activities of the monarchy. Let it begin. For the crowned killers of Europe, torture, disemboweling, hanging, burning, strangling, poisoning, and killing in the most satanic manner is the order of the day. This is the modus operandi of royal families. For centuries, the royal elite have devised terrible punishments for anyone accused of treason. The monarchy reserved the most disgusting forms of torture and death for those who questioned the royal will. A so-called traitor would often have each arm and leg tied to 4 horses, which were whipped to gallop in opposite directions, thus ripping the victim into 4 parts, whilst still alive. Often, the royal elite would divide the victim's heart into sections and send these for public display to different parts of the country as a macabre warning. The British throne has been bathed in blood for centuries. At one time, Britain contained several small kingdoms. These small kingdoms, ruled over by an intermarried, self-elected elite, were gradually amalgamated into the single monarchy which rules over Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, England, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and secretly controls the United States of America. As each decade dawned, the most ruthless, cunning, and murderous monarchs assassinated the regional kings and seized their property. Over history, the most heartless, cruel, disgusting, dishonest, and psychopathic royal family would triumph, eventually establishing a global empire where ordinary people are crippled with taxes demanded by a monarchy living on the other side of the planet. The so-called British Empire, which at one time included Hong Kong and India, was created by blade and bullet. The so-called royal family which triumphed is basically German. They are seated on almost every throne in Europe. They are the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha-Battenberg bloodline, which often intermarries with the Hesse-Kassel German nobility and claim Jewish descent from the royal house of David in ancient Israel. They raise their children without love or compassion, breeding each successive generation to be at the head of a military establishment who keep an angered peace by use of fear, surveillance, and war. By the 1600s, the thrones of Europe were mostly occupied by Germans, which had super wealth, earning vast profits from peasant labor, outright slavery, and the international opium trade. This Germanic family, known as the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas, the Schleswig-Holsteins, the Habsburgs, Romanovs, and House of Kassel-Hesse, shared the same tiny genetic bloodline. This can clearly be seen in a photograph of the British King George V standing beside Tsar Nicholas of Russia. Queen Victoria is considered the most British of all queens. Her husband was German, and she wrote letters of state in German. Contrary to what the royal spin doctors have written in the school history books, Queen Victoria was not popular. She was often hissed in public, and there were no less than 7 attempts to kill her. Keeping the populace ignorant, using adults and children alike as virtual slaves in workhouses, providing no adequate protection against hypothermia, working every man and woman to exhaustion, and imposing a crippling poll tax was the modus operandi of Queen Victoria and all her relatives sitting on the thrones across Europe. So-called Victorian values allowed children to be used as slave labor. Inhumane slums and widespread poverty was common across the whole of Europe right up until the 1970s. Even now, in the 21st century, large numbers of British people live in concrete boxes without adequate education, and therefore unable to find a profession to lift themselves out of poverty. There are as many homeless people in Europe today as there were 50 years ago. Today's royal family is in power due to the bloody, horrible, murdering activities of their forefathers. By the second half of the 16th century, the major bloodlines which sit on the thrones of Britain and Europe today were already established. One of the most vicious crowned killers was Tsar Ivan IV of Russia. His mother fell foul of one of the most common forms of royal assassination. She died of poisoning when Tsar Ivan was just 8 years old. The young Tsar took great advantage of his royal will, what Aleister Crowley described as the royal thelema, a Greek word for willpower. All monarchs can exert their will and decree any act, even murder and rape, and act above the law. When he was just 9 years old, Tsar Ivan started torturing animals. This is a practice which is continued in ritual form amongst initiates of the Ordo Templi Orientis, a secret Masonic academy previously headed by Aleister Crowley. By the age of 10, Ivan, Tsar of Russia, would personally oversee the torturing of so-called political prisoners. These were people who had merely been critical of his power. He committed his first rape at the age of 11. He was crowned in 1547 and diverted public attention away from their own abject poverty by entering into war with Poland and Lithuania. Tsar Ivan took thousands of prisoners and personally supervised their torture, often devising the most wicked torture techniques himself. Tsar Ivan positively relished the screams of people as they had their eyes torn out. Women and even children were disemboweled, mauled by wild bears for his amusement, and people had parts of their bodies cut off and fed to his dogs whilst they roasted alive on a spit. Ivan also threw children into freezing lakes and rivers, and by 1569 he had extended his royal fortunes and property, with 60,000 people having been brutally murdered, many by his own hands. One of the most popular secret societies in Victorian London was the Golden Dawn. Amongst its membership taking part in magical ceremonies was the author Bram Stoker. His most famous novel is Dracula. The vampirish nature of royal killers is renowned throughout history. Bram Stoker studied the career of psychopath Prince Vlad Dracul, who ruled Wallachia in the 15th century. Dracul means dragon. Prince Vlad was initiated into the royal court of the dragon by his father, which launched the young prince on a bloodthirsty sadistic career which saw him employ every form of torture and even force political prisoners to eat each other. Prince Vlad took the greatest sadistic pleasure in watching women eat parts of their own children, or husbands eating their own wives. Every British and European monarchy has a history of murder by a brother, cousin, or wife. Even royal mothers have killed their own children. King William II of England was murdered by his own brother, who became King Henry I. In her fascinating book, God of the Witches, published in 1933, historian Margaret Murray revealed that King William II was a pagan warlock and had most probably been murdered as part of a ritual sacrifice to nature spirits who were invoked in order to assist the wicked royal dynasty of Britain. Pagan holidays, such as the equinox and solstice, play an important role in the royal calendar. In fact, the current heir to the British throne, Prince William, the son of the murdered Princess Diana, was cut from Diana's womb on the summer solstice, a date which has important occult significance. The reason given for the caesarean surgical birth was that William was delivered timely, so that Prince Charles would not have his royal engagements disrupted by the prince's birth. One of Prince Charles's royal antecedents was the cruel Angevin dynasty. Their offspring sat on the thrones of England and also ruled the illegally captured kingdom of Jerusalem. One of the counts of Anjou returned from the Crusades with a new wife. The so-called Crusades were perpetrated with the assistance of the Knights Templar. Thousands of Islamic men, women and children were tortured and butchered whilst the Knights Templar ransacked holy places and slaughtered in the name of Christ. They were searching for ancient Kabbalistic texts whilst practicing a form of black magic, invoking spirits according to the teachings of King Solomon. Some Templars eventually confessed that rituals were often held where spirits were invoked and commanded to speak through shrunken, severed heads called Baphomets. The Count of Anjou returned to Europe with a mysterious wife he had met during the Crusades. She was crowned Queen Melusine and became known as the Devil's Daughter. Her children seeded the famous Angevin monarchy of Europe, who became famous for their violent tempers. One descendant of Melusine, the Devil's Daughter, was King Henry II of England, who imprisoned his own wife for many years. King Henry also murdered his own Archbishop, Mr. Thomas Becket. King Henry's son was the wicked King John, who became famous through the legend of Robin Hood. King John of England had his own nephew murdered on the anniversary of an old pagan holiday called Maundy Thursday. King John was a professional psychopath, ordering by decree the murder of hundreds of people. In May 1194, he had 300 prisoners beheaded in an orgy of blood. In the year 1212, a number with significant occult associations, he personally oversaw the hanging of 28 young boys in Wales. One of the most disgusting double murders at the hands of British royalty befell the young Princes Edward and Richard, who were imprisoned and eventually stabbed to death by order of King Richard III in 1483. psychics, such as the Dr. Nostradamus, were employed by the French monarchy. Nostradamus was a skilled scryer, staring endlessly into bowls of water until the reflected light was manipulated by spirits who foretold future events. Dr. Nostradamus wrote a book of prophecies called Centuries, which was published in 1555. He describes events from the mid-1500s through to the end of the world, which is predicted to come in the year 3797. Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France, asked him to plot the horoscopes of her husband, King Henry II. In 1560, King Charles IX of France appointed Nostradamus as his court physician. Nostradamus accurately predicted for the French Queen, Catherine de' Medici, the death of her own children and other information which was used to bolster the monarch's hold over the peasant population of France. Magicians and mediums who consult with spirits have always been employed by the royal elite. In medieval Britain, Dr. John Dee was consulted regularly by Queen Elizabeth I. At the British Museum in London, we see the dark mirror which John Dee used to see or scry the faces of spirits. Dee's ability to communicate with spirits led him to be employed as a spy, developing psychic espionage techniques, which we now call remote viewing. John Dee attended Trinity College in Cambridge, which became a place where occultists and the world of spies were intertwined. Aleister Crowley also attended Trinity College. In 1904, he wrote an introduction to an ancient book of spells called the Goetia. Soon after, Aleister Crowley followed the footsteps of John Dee and worked as a spy for Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service, MI5. In medieval Britain, anyone found communicating with spirits was in danger of being arrested by the many inquisitions organized by the Vatican. The costumes and wickedness of the Vatican's inquisitions would later be copied by the Ku Klux Klan in the United States, who used the so-called Earth Salute, which was originally devised by members of the Victorian secret society known as the Golden Dawn. Hitler would also use the same salute and drop millions of leaflets quoting the prophecies of Nostradamus across Europe during his attempt in the 1940s to create a global Nazi superstate. the Vatican has issued 3 papal bulls against Freemasonry and the magical rituals of the craft. Many Catholics have also expressed doubt over the Hebrew science of spirit communication known as the Kabbalah. However, disregarding the warnings of the Pope, medieval monarchs across Europe ignored Vatican law and employed the services of Kabbalists, astrologers and magicians, whilst being protected from prosecution by their power and wealth. Dr. John Dee was secretly initiated into the secrets of the Kabbalah by Rabbi Lowe in the 1500s. The Kabbalah offers a route map which is called the Tree of Life. Discarnate spirits, some angelic, some evil, occupy each point on the Tree of Life. These spirits can be called forth and invoked to serve the magician. Medieval astrologers and Kabbalists such as John Dee were hired by monarchs to plan their wars, or to experiment with alchemy, trying to transform base metals into gold and thus increase the already spectacular wealth of the monarchy. When a British monarch is crowned, an elaborate ceremony takes place which resembles the ritual crowning of King Solomon of ancient Israel. King Solomon ruled over ancient Israel and had extensive knowledge of the Kabbalah, which he used to communicate with demons.
As King Solomon was anointed king, the priest known as Zadok, and the prophet known as Nathan, so thou be anointed, blessed and consecrated, queen over all the people.
King Solomon is the single most important figure in the occult teachings of world international Freemasonry. The ancient Goetia is a book of powerful invocations and spells written by King Solomon. These ancient spells and evocations were used to summon spirits who were then psychically tortured and forced to serve King Solomon. The Goetia contains descriptions of 72 demons, some of whom control their own army of lesser demons. King Solomon evoked and imprisoned these spirits in a bronze vessel sealed using magic symbols. The Goetia explains how the spirits can be compelled into obedience. The Goetia describes a demonic royal hierarchy of spirits, many of which are referred to as knights, princes, and kings. King Solomon ruled ancient Israel from the year 970 to 928 BC. Satanists, occultists, and Freemasons worldwide venerate the memory of King Solomon, who owned a magic ring engraved with a symbol called the Seal of Solomon. This gave him power over the invisible monarchy of demons. This Seal of Solomon is better known as the Star of David. It is this symbol which is encoded into the $1 bill. It is also the flag of Israel. This symbol, which was used to invoke and control Asmodeus, one of the senior spirit kings in the infernal monarchy of hell. Well, David Icke's book, The Biggest Secret, is one of my all-time favourite books. There is a section in there talking about a character called Pindar, who apparently is the boss of some of these satanic councils or satanic groups in America, and he also attends rituals in Europe. And according to some of the sources which David Icke used for his book, Pindar, this character, is otherwise known as the Marquis de Libu, or the Marquis of Libu. So there is a section in the book saying, you know, can you give us any more information? And David Icke requests the reader, you know, if you've got any information, then come forward. Now, a good friend of mine actually wrote a book called The Way of the Dragon, and it's an excellent book. It's all in French, and I have French grandparents, so it's quite easy for me to be able to research ancient French documents. Now, Libu was suggested to me by my friend as possibly being an anagram of the old French term, which is Bilu or Biliou. Now, Biliou is a plural of the word Belial, and Belial means demon, and Biliou is an old French term for the plural, which is demons. So if Libu is an anagram of Bilu, and I believe it is. This man is attending the Satanic Councils. Apparently he arrives in a white Rolls Royce or some white limousine. And he calls himself the Marquis of Demons, or the Marquis of Demons. Now that's absolutely fascinating, because many of the 72 spirits which we see described in the Howling, the Book of Howling, otherwise known as the Goetia, it's also known as the Book of Shadows. Many of the 72 spirits there, you've got all these instructions of how to summon these spirits. Many of them are marquises. Many of them are dukes, presidents, kings. I would say probably around a quarter of them have a rank of marquis or equivalent to a marquis. And if you conjure these spirits using the information which you find in the Goetia and also in other medieval grimoires, you will see that in your mind's eye these spirits often appear riding dragons or griffins, or they hold serpents in their hands, and at your command they will take the form of a human being. At the magician's command they will take the form of a human. But if you look at the sketches which have been used to illustrate many different versions of the Goetia, you will see that many of these spirits they have royal rank, like a marquis or an earl or a duke, king, and there is definitely reptilian symbology, and if you command the spirit to take on a human form, it will do, and it will shapeshift. So I think there's many parallels with my research into the medieval grimoires and the Goetia, which dates back probably to Sumeria and Babylon, and the research which is presented in The Biggest Secret, which is one of my all-time favourite books. Asmodeus, who often appears as a classic devil creature, can be found inside the church of Rennes-le-Château in the Languedoc region of southern France. This church was transformed into a Kabbalistic temple masquerading as an ordinary village church in the 1880s by Abbé Saunière, who discovered documents from King Solomon's temple stashed inside the altar. To this very day, the British coronation is a bastardized version of the actual coronation ritual of King Solomon. King Solomon and his magical temple are the central foundation stone of world international Freemasonry. The Masonic rituals are designed to invoke a magical atmosphere in the lodge. Millions of Freemasons meet every week at lodges all over the planet, all venerating and singing hymns to King Solomon and spirits. Since the Dark Ages, misguided, selfish individuals have joined various cults such as the OTO, the Knights Templar, and Freemasonry in order to study different elements of ritual, blood oaths, and a form of the Kabbalah. The upper levels of Freemasonry require the initiate to memorize dozens of pages of text written in Hebrew and study symbols used in the Goetia to invoke spirits. The Templars and Masons have been led by senior royals since the beginning. The Masonic network provides the monarchy with an invisible worldwide cabal who have sworn allegiance to the monarchy and their Masonic demon god known as Yabulon. The entity known as Baal is named by King Solomon as the most senior spirit in the infernal royal hierarchy of demons. Masons swear never to divulge each other's secrets, also never to criticize a fellow Mason, even if he be guilty of murder. This provides the monarchy with a global army of Freemasons willing to do their service in secret to the crown. To the British royals of the Middle Ages, murder by magic was accepted as fact. Queen Elizabeth I and King Henry VIII ruled Britain at a time when the black arts of witchcraft and poisoning were inseparably linked. Across Europe, the monarchy was involved with one murder after another, many deaths attributed to a form of black magic, often perpetrated by someone within the royal court. In 1388, the Queen of Aragon was accused of the attempted murder of her own son by using witchcraft. In 1419, Jeanne of Navarre, the widow of King Henry IV, tried using magical spells to kill her stepson, Henry V. Jeanne of Navarre was convicted on evidence offered by her chaplain. Further revelations exposed the fact that witchcraft was being practiced right at the very heart of the royal court of England. Like the Kabbalist magicians, witches were also sometimes employed by the monarchy. Medieval witches would often make wax figurines resembling the likeness of the intended victim. The doll would then be tortured and burnt, often causing ill effects on the victims. It is claimed that this technique can induce an early death by heart attack or disease. King Alfred recognized the tendency for royals and noblemen to use witchcraft and imposed the death sentence for anyone practicing the black arts. However, his law went unheeded. By the late Middle Ages, satanic black masses were attended by royals and aristocrats in Vienna, Paris, Venice, and London. King Henry VIII came to the throne knowing that psychics, magicians, and mystics with knowledge of necromancy had been on permanent employment with the royal court. In 1538, Mabel Brigg was executed in York for trying to kill Henry VIII using the so-called Black Fast, where the sorcerer performs a hunger strike inside a magic circle whilst directing the wrath of spirits against the victim. In 1429, it was disclosed through letters written by Jean of Navarre that she was a member of a coven of witches which operated right in the heart of the English royal court. One of her fellow witches was the wife of one of her stepsons, Eleanor Cobham, who was married to Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester. Eleanor Cobham was arrested on the 25th of June 1441 at the King's Head Tavern in Cheapside, London, and stood trial for witchcraft. Her husband was the heir to the British throne. Another royal witch was soon exposed, the Duchess Jacquette of St. Pol, who was married to another brother of Henry V. She stood in a witchcraft tribunal which heard evidence suggesting that she had ensured her daughter's marriage using talismans and black magic. A frenzy of satanic ritual was eventually exposed at the heart of the royal courts of Britain and France by several 19th century historians. Catherine de' Medici, the Queen of France, performed several satanic black masses for the benefit of the royal aristocratic elite. French author Jean Baudin wrote a book about witchcraft recounting that in the 1600s Catherine Monvoisin and the priest Etienne Guibourg performed black masses for the mistress of the King of France. The Black Mass is a satanic parody of the Roman Catholic Mass, often involving the ritual murder of a virgin. Aleister Crowley wrote extensively about ritual sacrifice and recommended that a child under the age of 9 of above average intelligence made the ideal sacrificial victim. Much to the horror of the 17th century royal elite, Etienne Guibourg publicly confessed that the mistress of King Louis XIV of France, Madame de Montespan, would lie naked upon a satanic altar with a chalice of wine infused with intoxicating herbs on her bare stomach. She would hold 2 black candles in each of her outstretched hands. The royal Black Mass, combined with a family tradition of cruelty and outright evil, would be continued into the 1700s by the aristocrat known as the Marquis de Sade. The de Sade family were members of France's oldest nobility. The Marquis de Sade repeatedly abused young prostitutes in his castle at Lacoste in France. He wrote about pornographic orgies and ritualized sexual beatings involving monks, priests, and even the Pope himself. Sade avoided a prison sentence by claiming insanity and spent most of his life in a comfortable mental asylum. In the asylum, the Marquis de Sade immediately began an affair with a 13-year-old girl called Madeleine Leclerc. Sade died in 1814. His death marked a new era of Satanism and murder at the royal courts of Britain, France, and Russia. Witch hunts of the Middle Ages took place all over Europe and even in the United States of America. However, witch hunts in the Russian Imperial Empire were much more rare. To this very day, a huge number of Russian people are attributed with psychic power. In the 19th century, the Russian Romanov royal family employed a powerful hypnotist and mystic. He has become known as the Mad Monk Grigory Rasputin. The story of Rasputin exemplifies the psychopathic nature of the monarchy. Rasputin was a self-styled monk and therefore had friends in the Russian Orthodox Church. Rasputin had endured poverty, giving him the common touch with the peasant population of Russia. He was revered as someone who could heal, therefore bringing him notoriety across the vast empire of Imperial Russia. Rasputin was also someone who could entertain the company of royalty. Rasputin was seen as a threat by the